Tonight, you step beyond the candlelit gates of the medieval world into a place few dared speak about after dark. Behind thick stone walls, beneath the sound of monastery bells and winter winds, troubled souls were locked away in medieval mental asylums, places filled with whispered prayers, strange remedies, restless nights, and stories no one could fully explain. But what really happened inside these forgotten institutions? Were they places of cruelty, or the closest thing the medieval world had to compassion? As the fire crackles and the cold mist rolls across the town, you're about to find out. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy these quiet journeys into the past. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there tonight. Now, dim the lights, and let's step carefully through the iron doors together. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself beneath the dripping arch of a medieval gatehouse, while cold rain slides from the hood of your wool cloak and gathers at the tips of your boots in little rivers of mud. The evening air smells of wet hay, horse sweat, river mist, and wood smoke drifting low between crooked timber houses. Somewhere beyond the walls, monastery bells ring the fading hour, slow and hollow through the fog. A cartwheel creaks nearby like an old man complaining about his knees, which, to be fair, is also what most travellers sound like after 3 days on medieval roads. The torch above the gate spits sparks into the damp wind, doing its best against the rain with the determination of a candle trying to fight the sea. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You pull your cloak tighter and stamp warmth back into your feet, while guards with rust-flecked helmets glance at you with the tired suspicion reserved for strangers, tax collectors, and anyone carrying suspiciously clean shoes. Truthfully, you probably would not last a week out here without developing opinions about turnips strong enough to start arguments at supper. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while the rain drums softly on the gatehouse roof, feel free to comment your location and local time tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The guards finally wave you through after inspecting your pilgrim badge with all the seriousness of men pretending they can still feel their fingers. You duck beneath the low arch and enter the town itself, where puddles reflect wavering torchlight and narrow lanes twist between leaning buildings blackened by soot and years of winter smoke. The place rests beside a slow grey river. Barges creak at the docks beyond the walls, and somewhere unseen a dog barks once, then thinks better of it. Most shutters are already closed against the weather, though thin lines of candlelight still glow behind oiled cloth windows. The smell of supper lingers in the air pottage thick with onions, coarse rye bread, smoked fish, and the sour warmth of ale. You pass beneath hanging shop signs that sway in the rain, a cobbler's boot, a painted goose, a faded crescent moon marking an alehouse. Water drips steadily from roof gutters made of hollowed wood. Underfoot, the street is layered with straw and rushes meant to fight the mud, though they surrendered that battle several centuries ago. No one can quite agree when the old hospital was first built. Some swear it began as a monastery refuge during a winter plague. Others insist a noble widow founded it after her son began hearing voices beside the river reeds. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the place is feared more for what happens inside or for what people imagine happens there after dark. You first hear mention of it while sheltering beneath the awning of a baker's stall. An old woman wrapped in 2 shawls crosses herself as a pair of servants hurry past carrying bundles of clean linen. "They're taking fresh bedding up the hill," she mutters to no one in particular. "Storm nights unsettle them." You glance uphill through the rain. Beyond the clustered roofs rises a square stone building attached to a small chapel, its narrow windows glowing faintly gold through the mist. A bell tower stands beside it, dark against the clouds. The old woman notices you looking. "You're not planning to sleep there, are you?" Before you can answer, she continues in the patient tone of someone who's repeated the same warning for 20 years. "They keep the troubled ones, the wandering minds, the sorrowful, the screaming, the silent too, sometimes. Those are the worst, if you ask me." She sniffs sharply and rearranges her shawl. "Though the brothers say many are harmless and just afflicted." Afflicted, the word hangs in the damp air. In this century, people speak of troubled minds the way sailors speak of storms, sometimes as illness, sometimes as curse, sometimes as punishment from heaven, and often as all three before breakfast. One village blames bad air rising from marshes. Another swears moonlight causes strange thoughts if it touches sleepers too long. Some folk nail rowan branches above doors to keep madness away. Others carry saints' relics sewn into tiny cloth pouches against the chest. A young apprentice nearby overhears the conversation and eagerly adds his own wisdom. "My uncle says too much reading causes it." The baker behind him smacks the back of his head with a flour-covered hand. "Then priests would all be barking at the moon." Rain continues whispering across the town while carts rattle toward the square. You move on slowly, drawn uphill by curiosity more than good judgment. The streets narrow as you climb. Here the houses grow older, their upper floors leaning close enough to nearly touch overhead. Water drips from laundry lines strung between windows. You pass a roadside shrine tucked into a wall niche, where a tiny painted saint watches the street with chipped wooden eyes. Someone has left beeswax candles there beside wilted herbs and a little loaf of bread hardened nearly to stone. Medieval offerings are rarely glamorous. Heaven apparently accepts stale rye. Farther uphill, the sounds of the market fade behind you. The wind grows colder. At the crest of the rise, the hospital finally stands clear through the rain. It is larger than you expected. Long stone walls stretch around a courtyard. Narrow slit windows burn dimly with candlelight. A small chapel clings to one side beneath a steep roof darkened by moss and weather. Smoke drifts from several chimneys into the wet evening sky. Outside the gate waits a cart loaded with barrels of ale and bundles of straw mattresses. A sleepy mule flicks rainwater from its ears while two lay brothers unload supplies beneath lantern light. One of them notices you lingering nearby. He is broad-shouldered, middle-aged, and wrapped in a heavy brown cloak patched at both elbows. Iron keys hang from his belt with a sound like distant bells whenever he moves. "You seeking shelter?" he asks. His voice is gentler than you expected. Before answering, you glance once more toward the glowing windows above the walls. Somewhere inside, faintly, you hear singing, not loud, not frightening, just thin human voices drifting through rain and stone together. The brother follows your gaze. "Stormy nights are difficult," he says quietly. "Some sleep easier if there's music." A gust of cold wind pushes rain sideways through the torchlight. Behind the walls, another bell sounds low and soft. And standing there in the mud with wet boots, aching shoulders, and smoke drifting through the dark like wandering spirits, you realize the stories surrounding this place may be stranger and far more human than the town below likes to admit. The lay brother studies you for another moment while rainwater drips steadily from the edge of his hood. "You look half frozen," he says at last. Guesthouse hearth is warmer than the street, assuming Brother Eldrick has not burned the stew again. He lifts one of the ale barrels with surprising ease and jerks his head toward a smaller building attached to the outer wall. You follow him across the muddy courtyard stones. your boots slipping once on wet moss while the mule watches with quiet judgment. Medieval animals always seem deeply disappointed in human decisions. The guest-house door opens with a groan of swollen oak, releasing a breath of warmth, smoke, and boiled onions. Inside, the low hall glows amber beneath beeswax candles and a broad hearth fire. Damp cloaks steam from wooden pegs near the entrance. Rushes cover the floor, mixed with rosemary and sweet flag to soften the smell of wet wool, though the wool is clearly winning. Several travellers sit around trestle tables. A pair of pilgrims warm their hands over cups of ale. A merchant in a fur-lined cap snores softly beside his pack chest. Near the hearth, an old monk stirs a pot with the grave concentration of a man conducting sacred scholarship. "Still edible?" the lay brother asks. The monk tastes a stew, pauses thoughtfully, then shrugs. "More or less." A ringing endorsement. You remove your soaked gloves and settle near the fire while feeling slowly returns to your fingers in painful little stings. A novice brings you coarse bread and a wooden cup of weak ale without asking payment yet. Hospitality matters deeply here, especially in church houses. Travellers may grumble endlessly about monastery food, but after 3 days on muddy roads, even thin cabbage pottage begins to taste like a blessing personally delivered by heaven. The monk at the hearth finally turns toward you. "You're newly arrived." You nod. "Then you've already heard the stories," he says. The pilgrims exchange glances at that. One of them, a narrow-faced woman with a shell badge stitched to her cloak, lowers her voice. They say a man inside bit through an iron chain last winter. The lay brother snorts loudly. He bit leather straps, which is unpleasant enough without improving the tale every market day. The monk stirs the pot again. Fear fattens stories quicker than butter fattens abbots. A brief silence follows while rain rattles softly against the shutters. You ask whether many people truly live within the hospital walls. Enough, the monk answers carefully. Some stay weeks, some stay years, some merely need shelter from their own grief. He settles onto a bench across from you, warming old hands over the firelight. In truth, there are many kinds of troubled minds. Melancholy, frenzy, confusion after fever, sorrows that root too deeply, visions, sleeplessness, strange fixations. Some arrive violent, some cannot speak at all. The pilgrim woman quietly crosses herself. Some are merely abandoned. The monk adds after a moment. That hangs heavier in the room than the rain outside. The hospital, you learn, belongs partly to the monastery and partly to the town authorities. Noble families sometimes pay generously to keep afflicted relatives hidden from public view. Poorer souls arrive through charity or necessity. A few are brought by frightened neighbours after wandering roads barefoot or shouting prophecies in churchyards. No one can quite agree whether the institution heals many people. Some swear prayer works wonders there. Others insist the quiet routine matters more than relics or holy water. There are even whispers that certain patients improve simply because someone finally feeds them regularly and allows them to sleep indoors. The merchant near the fire wakes long enough to mutter, "Regular meals would improve my temperament too," before falling asleep again with admirable commitment. Brother Aldrich the stew monk ladles supper into wooden bowls. The meal is plain but comforting barley pottage thickened with leeks, bits of smoked fish, and coarse bread dark as tree bark. A small dish of salt sits in the centre of the table like treasure. Salt is costly enough that people guard it carefully. One novice watches the bowl with the intensity of a dragon protecting gold. As you eat, the conversation drifts toward remedies. A younger monk explains that physicians sometimes prescribe music, warm baths, or herbal infusions for distressed minds, lavender for calm, sage for clarity, poppy syrup for sleep, leeches for balancing the humours, because medieval medicine always circles back to somebody removing blood with suspicious confidence. Though not too many leeches, the monk admits. Brother Odo once fainted during treatment. The patient, you ask, Brother Odo. Even the pilgrims laugh quietly at that. The fire settles lower while wind moans faintly outside the shutters. Beyond the guest house wall, you hear distant bells marking the evening office in the chapel. The sound rolls through stone and rain together, soft and solemn. One of the pilgrims asks in a whisper whether demons are truly believed to cause madness. The older monk sighs gently before answering. Some believe that, yes, others see illness of the body, others sorrow of the soul, most simply do not know. He turns the wooden cup slowly in his hands. When people fear what they cannot understand, certainty becomes very tempting. The room grows thoughtful after that. A novice enters, carrying folded blankets smelling faintly of lavender and smoke. He distributes them among the guests before kneeling briefly beside the hearth to warm his hands. "You'll hear singing again tonight," he says to you quietly, from the upper ward. "Does it trouble you?" He thinks for a moment. Less than silence. Outside. The storm deepens. Rain beats steadily across the roofs while draughts creep beneath the doors. The guest house settles into the slow rhythms of evening bowls scraped clean, boots drying by the hearth, low murmured prayers before sleep. You notice small details now that warmth has softened your exhaustion. Iron hooks blackened by years of smoke, wax drippings layered thick upon the candle-stands, tiny carved saints tucked into wall niches, a cat asleep beneath the bench with one eye half open in case food accidentally falls from heaven. The lay brother from earlier sits beside the fire repairing a leather strap. "You plan to visit the hospital tomorrow?" he asks. You admit that you do. He nods slowly without looking up. "Then remember, this place is quieter than people imagine." His rough fingers work steadily through the leather. Most suffering does not howl. Usually it whispers. The wind rattles the shutters hard enough to make the candles flicker. Far uphill, beyond the guest house wall, another bell rings through the darkness. You picture the stone wards above the town, narrow candlelit corridors, restless sleepers beneath wool blankets, brothers moving softly through the night carrying lanterns and keys. And somewhere beyond those thick walls, voices continue singing faintly through the storm. Morning arrives slowly beneath a ceiling of grey cloud and drifting mist. You wake to the sound of bells. Not loud bells, not triumphant bells, but soft monastery bells rolling through dawn like distant ripples over dark water. For a moment you remain beneath rough wool blankets listening to them while pale light creeps through the guest house shutters. Around you, the hall still smells of smoke, damp leather, and last night's stew. The merchant snores on with astonishing dedication. A pilgrim quietly mutters prayers nearby. Somewhere beneath the benches, the cat has apparently stolen a piece of fish, and now guards it with the fierce dignity of a crowned ruler. Cold air slips through the cracks in the shutters when you finally rise. Your boots, drying beside the hearth overnight, are merely damp now instead of actively hostile. In medieval terms, this counts as luxury. Brother Aldrich already tends the morning fire. "You survived the stew," he says, sounding mildly surprised. Barely awake novices move around the hall carrying buckets of water from the courtyard well. Their sandals scrape softly over rushes scattered across the stone floor. One pauses to add fresh herbs beneath the bench's lavender, mint and wormwood to fight the smell of too many wet travellers packed into one hall. Breakfast appears in the humble form of coarse bread, soft cheese, and weak ale warmed slightly against the cold. Medieval people drink ale the way modern people drink patience constantly and often with disappointment. Outside, dawn spreads pale silver over the town. You step into the courtyard wrapped in your cloak while frost clings lightly to the edges of barrels and cartwheels. The rain has stopped at last, leaving the air washed clean and sharp enough to sting your lungs. Smoke rises from chimneys across the hillside in thin blue ribbons. The lay brother with the iron keys waits near the gate holding a lantern, though morning has technically arrived. Mist stays thick uphill, he explains. Easy to lose your footing. You follow him out through the outer yard and onto the narrow lane climbing toward the hospital proper. The town below slowly wakes behind you. Bakers open shutters. Chickens complain bitterly about the weather. Somewhere a smith begins hammering iron with the enthusiasm of a man determined to offend every sleeping soul within 3 streets. The brother introduces himself as Mathieu. He walks steadily despite the slippery stones, keys clinking softly against his belt with every step. His boots are patched twice at the heel. A rosary hangs from one wrist beside an old burn scar. "You've worked there long, you ask?" 14 winters. The answer surprises you. You expected darker things, he says without accusation. Mist drifts between the buildings as you climb. The hospital looms ahead now, its stone walls emerging slowly from the fog like the hull of a ship at sea. Narrow windows glow faintly gold from candles still burning within. Mathieu notices your silence. Most visitors expect screams, he says. Truth is, mornings are usually quiet. A bell rings overhead from the chapel tower, low and measured. The brother crosses himself automatically. That marks prime, he explains. The brothers pray. Patients wake. Fires are lit. Bread is cut. Chamber pots regretted. You cannot help laughing softly at that. Even now, it is hard to tell whether monasteries survive because of discipline or because humour prevents everyone from collapsing entirely. Near the gate, 2 women wait beside a mule cart loaded with sacks of oats and folded blankets. One carries a basket filled with eggs, carefully wrapped in straw. "Donation from the manor farms," Mathieu says quietly. "Winter stores matter." The women nod politely as you pass. One presses a small charm of woven reeds into the gatepost before leaving. You ask about it. "For restless spirits," Mathieu replies. Some folk believe woven circles confuse wandering thoughts. Do you believe it? He shrugs. "I believe people sleep easier when they think they have done something useful." Inside the outer gate, the hospital courtyard opens wide before you. You pause instinctively. The place is not what you imagined. There are no chains hanging from walls, no shadowy dungeon filled with moaning figures. Instead, you find a weathered stone complex arranged around a central yard scattered with frost-covered straw. A well stands near the centre, beside stacked firewood protected beneath tarred cloth. Chickens wander freely between buildings with the confidence of creatures convinced they own the institution. Several brothers move quietly through the cold morning carrying water buckets and baskets of bread. Thin smoke rises from kitchen chimneys. Somewhere nearby, someone sweeps rushes from a corridor. You hear voices too, calm voices. A woman humming softly, a man laughing once at something unseen, another voice reciting fragments of prayer. No one can quite agree whether medieval hospitals were places of healing or confinement, because often they were both at once. Here the line feels especially thin. Mathieu leads you toward the chapel first. The day begins there, he says. The chapel is small but warm. Beeswax candles burn before painted saints darkened by age and smoke. Frosty light filters through narrow-coloured glass windows, scattering muted reds and blues across the stone floor. Several patients kneel quietly among the brothers. You study them carefully without meaning to. One elderly man rocks gently while clutching a wooden cross smooth from handling. A young woman stares upward at the candle smoke as if listening to distant music. Another patient, wrapped in layers of patched wool, sleeps peacefully against a pillar while a novice carefully places a blanket over his shoulders. None of them look monstrous, only tired. A priest begins chanting morning prayers in low measured Latin. The sound fills the chapel like slow-moving water. Mathieu kneels beside the others, and after a moment you do too, mostly for warmth, if not holiness. The chant echoes softly beneath the stone arches. Outside, wind brushes the chapel walls. Inside, candles flicker gold against old stone while weary people bow their heads together beneath the same drifting smoke. You notice then that one patient carries tiny bells sewn into his sleeve cuffs. When he shifts slightly, they chime faintly. Mathieu whispers that some believe gentle bells calm troubled thoughts by keeping evil spirits from drawing near. Others claim the sound helps wandering minds remain anchored to the present moment. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. After prayers end, the patients rise slowly. Some return to the wards, others help carry bread or fetch water. Life resumes in quiet practical rhythms. And as you step back into the pale winter morning with frost crunching beneath your boots and monastery bells fading into the mist above the town, you begin to understand that this place survives not through mystery alone, but through routine, through fires kept lit, meals carried carefully, blankets folded, prayers repeated, and weary people continuing onward one cold dawn at a time. The frost begins melting by mid-morning, leaving the courtyard slick with water that glimmers pale beneath the cloudy sky. Brothers move steadily between buildings carrying baskets, buckets, folded linens, and armfuls of firewood, somewhere nearby. A cook curses softly at a stubborn oven door with language only slightly less passionate than formal exorcism. Mathieu leads you beneath a covered stone passage connecting the chapel to the main wards. The corridor smells faintly of beeswax, damp mortar, rosemary, and old smoke trapped within the walls over many winters. Iron hooks line the passage where lanterns hang after sunset. Rushes cover the floor in uneven layers, fresh straw scattered over older bedding that crackles softly beneath your boots. The floors grow dangerous in cold weather, Mathieu says. Rushes help keep footing. And the smell, they help lose that battle with dignity. You pass an oak door reinforced with black iron bands. Mathieu unlocks it carefully with one of the heavy keys hanging from his belt. The lock clicks loudly in the quiet corridor. Beyond lies the first ward. Warmth meets you first. Not comfortable warmth, but the close heat of many bodies sharing one sheltered place through winter. Candles flicker from wall niches, their light wavering across stone arches darkened by soot. Rows of wooden bedsteads line the walls, each covered with rough blankets and straw mattresses. Some patients sleep. Others sit quietly near the narrow windows where pale daylight filters through horn panes. One woman patiently braids strips of cloth together. An old man stares into the hearth flames while murmuring something too soft to hear. No one screams. That realization settles strangely inside you. A younger attendant carrying folded linens nods respectfully to Mathieu as he passes. The man cannot be more than 20. Ink stains mark his fingers, suggesting he copies records as often as he carries chamber pots. "Quiet night?" Mathieu asks. "Mostly," the attendant replies. "Except Thomas tried convincing the chickens they were archbishops again." From a nearby bed, a patient mutters very seriously, "They have the posture for it." The attendant sighs. "You see what I endure. Even here, Laughter survives in little pockets. You walk slowly through the ward while trying not to stare openly. Some patients glance toward you with curiosity, others barely notice your presence at all. A woman wrapped in a faded blue shawl rocks gently while holding a carved wooden spoon, as though it were precious jewellery. Mathieu notices your attention. She arrived 3 years ago after fever took her family, he says quietly. Hardly speaks now, but she carves spoons beautifully. You see several hanging neatly near her bed, each etched with tiny flowers and birds. Further down the room, a man carefully sweeps the rushes into neat piles with almost ceremonial concentration. Another patient helps mend blankets beside the hearth. They work, you ask softly. When able, Mathieu says, routine calms many minds. No one can quite agree whether the labour is treatment, necessity, or simply a way to make long days pass more gently. Perhaps it is all three. The ward itself reflects that uncertain balance between care and confinement. Windows sit too high to climb through, doors lock from the outside, yet blankets are tucked carefully around sleeping shoulders. Clay cups of watered ale stand beside beds. Small wooden charms hang above certain bedsteads, saints carved from oak. Braided herbs. Tiny iron crosses against wandering spirits. You pause beside one bed where dried flowers rest beneath a candle. For nightmares, the attendant explains, some swear lavender drives bad dreams away. Does it? He considers this honestly. It smells nicer than terror. At the far end of the ward, another iron-bound door waits partially open. Mathieu hesitates briefly before leading you onward. This whole house is the calmer residence, he says. The next can be harder. The second ward lies deeper within the building where daylight barely reaches. Here the ceilings lower slightly. The air smells stronger of sweat, vinegar, herbs, and damp wool drying near the fire. A patient sings somewhere behind a curtain partition. The tune drifts through the room in fragments half lullaby, half prayer. Several attendants move quietly among the beds. One reads aloud from a psalter to a grey-haired man curled beneath blankets. Another gently guides a trembling patient toward a bench near the hearth. You notice restraints hanging neatly from pegs near the wall. Leather straps. Ropes. Padded cuffs. Mathieu sees your eyes linger there. Only when needed, he says firmly. His voice carries exhaustion more than defensiveness. Some arrive terrified enough to harm themselves. Others strike without warning during fever or confusion. He touches the leather strap thoughtfully. A frightened mind can turn the body against itself. The singing behind the curtain stops abruptly. Then comes soft weeping. An attendant disappears behind the partition carrying warm cloths and murmured reassurances. No panic follows, no cruelty, just weary familiarity. You stand near the hearth while firelight crackles across the stones. Above the mantel hangs a painted image of Saint Dymphna, protector of the mentally afflicted according to certain traditions. Beeswax candles burn beneath her image beside little offerings left by families' ribbons, wooden tokens, tiny coins, bits of embroidery. Pilgrims come asking her blessing, the young attendant explains. Do miracles happen? He glances toward the patients scattered through the room. Sometimes people sleep through the night for the first time in months, he says quietly. Sometimes they remember their own names again. Sometimes nothing changes at all. Outside the narrow windows, snowflakes begin drifting slowly through the pale afternoon sky. A patient near the fire suddenly points toward you. You've got road mud still on your hem, he announces gravely. You look down. He is correct. Sharp eyes, Mathieu says. The man nods with great dignity before returning to stirring absolutely nothing inside an empty bowl. those who tell the tale never fully agree how much medieval caretakers understood about troubled minds. Yet walking these wards, you sense something complicated beneath the superstition and fear, imperfect kindness, clumsy compassion. Human beings working with limited knowledge and endless uncertainty. An old bell rings somewhere overhead. Dinner preparations begin almost immediately. The attendants move through the halls, lighting more candles against the growing dusk. Trenchers are stacked, water buckets refilled, fires fed with fresh wood. Daily life continues. Not dramatic, not monstrous, just slow, difficult, ordinary care carried out behind iron keys and stone walls while winter gathers quietly outside. And as candlelight deepens along the corridors and snow whispers softly against the narrow windows, the hospital begins settling toward another long medieval evening. By late afternoon, the smell of supper spreads through the wards long before the meal itself appears. It arrives gradually, first wood smoke drifting from the kitchens, then onions softening in iron pots, then the unmistakable scent of barley thickening into stew. Even the patients nearest the windows begin stirring with quiet anticipation. Hunger, unlike philosophy or theology, remains wonderfully consistent across the centuries. Candles are lit one by one as dusk gathers beyond the horn-paned windows. Their small flames flicker against soot-dark beams overhead, while attendants move through the halls carrying stacks of wooden trenchers tucked against their chests. You follow Mathieu into the main refectory, a long chamber warmed by two broad hearths. Rushes cover the floor in fresh layers here, mixed with dried lavender and crushed mint. The herbs release faint sweetness beneath hundreds of footsteps, though not quite enough sweetness to overcome the smell of boiled cabbage bravely fighting for dominance. Several patients already sit along the trestle tables. The calmer residents eat together when weather and tempers allow it. Those too frightened, ill, or unpredictable remain in smaller side rooms nearby. The arrangement feels less like punishment and more like careful navigation around unseen currents. Brother Aldrich ladles stew from an enormous iron cauldron while muttering to himself about salt shortages. A monastery could survive plague, war, an invasion, he grumbles, but heaven forbid merchants raise salt prices before winter. A patient near the end of the table nods solemnly. Truly the end times. You sit among them while bowls are passed hand to hand. Supper tonight is thick barley pottage with onions, carrots, and bits of smoked eel floating somewhere inside like shy little treasures. Dark rye bread accompanies it, dense enough to qualify as light masonry. Still, after the cold day, the meal feels deeply comforting. Steam curls upward into the dim rafters while spoons scrape softly against wood. For several minutes the room settles into near silence except for chewing, crackling firewood, and the distant winter wind brushing the outer walls. Then conversation slowly returns. An older woman wrapped in two wool shawls asks whether the snow will hold through the week. A young attendant complains about frozen water buckets splitting again overnight. Someone farther down the table insists he once saw a fox steal an entire roast chicken directly from a bishop's kitchen. "No one believes you, Martin," says another patient. That fox moved with divine purpose. Laughter travels gently through the hall. You begin noticing the rhythms of supervision woven quietly into the meal. Attendants never sit too far apart. Mathieu watches the room constantly even while eating. One novice refills cups before arguments can begin over ale portions. Another gently redirects a nervous patient whose hands shake too badly to hold a spoon steadily. The care feels practiced. Not perfect, not modern, but practiced. No one can quite agree whether medieval hospitals operated more through charity or necessity. Watching the brothers here, you suspect necessity taught its own form of mercy. Winter leaves little room for romantic illusions. People must be fed, fires kept alive, blankets dried, fear soothed when possible. Across from you sits a thin man with careful grey eyes and ink stains across his cuffs. The scribe, Mathieu whispers quietly. Edric. Edric nods politely without looking up from his bread. He keeps records for the hospital: names, donations, deaths, recoveries, purchases, complaints from townsfolk, payments from noble families trying very hard not to discuss certain relatives publicly. You write everything down, you ask. Everything worth remembering, he replies. And what is worth remembering? At this, Edric finally glances toward you. Patterns, he says simply. Before you can ask more, a sudden noise interrupts the hall. A wooden cup crashes onto the floor. Several patients flinch instinctively. At the far table, a young man has risen abruptly from his bench. His breathing comes quick and uneven. Ale spreads across the rushes around his boots while his hands tremble violently. For one tense moment the room stills. Then Mathieu stands, not hurriedly, not angrily, just calmly. You're safe, Thomas, he says. The young man stares toward the dark windows where snow drifts faintly beyond the glass. They're out there again, he whispers. No one is outside. The faces. His voice cracks softly. Several attendants move closer without crowding him. One gently takes the overturned cup away. Another lowers the room's noise by guiding nearby conversations quieter. Thomas keeps staring toward the windows. I hear them scratching. Brother Aldrich crosses the hall carrying a small beeswax candle. Here, he says softly, watch the flame instead. For a long moment Thomas says nothing. Then slowly, shakily, he focuses on the candlelight. The room breathes again. No miracle occurs, no dramatic cure. Only a frightened young man gradually sitting back down while the attendants remain nearby until his hand stops shaking quite so badly. Supper quietly resumes. The moment lingers with you, though. Even now, it is hard to tell where medieval understanding ends and simple human instinct begins. The brothers speak of spirit sometimes, bad humours other times, grief and exhaustion at others. Yet when fear rises in the room, their first response is warmth, calm voices, familiar routines. Feed the frightened man, steady the room, keep the candle burning. Outside, snow thickens against the narrow windows while darkness settles fully over the hospital. Bells ring once from the chapel tower, marking the evening hour. After supper, many patients help clear the tables. You carry trenchers alongside them toward the kitchens where steam fogs the air, and servants scrub pots with sand and hot water. A sleepy kitchen boy nearly drops an entire stack of bowls after startling himself with his own reflection in a copper kettle. Haunted, he mutters darkly. You're looking at grease, says Aldrich. Greasy haunting, then. Back in the refectory, fresh rushes are scattered over the damp floor. Candles burn lower now, their flames soft and golden against the dark. Several patients gather near the hearth for warmth before bed. One woman spins wool slowly between her fingers while humming under her breath. Another patient carefully carves tiny birds from scraps of wood, using a knife too dull to threaten anyone except perhaps the concept of efficiency. Mathieu sits heavily beside the fire at last. Tiring work, you say quietly. He rubs his eyes. Mostly ordinary work, he answers. That surprises people. He watches the patients gathered near the flames. Some visitors expect monsters. Most days they find lonely people instead. Beyond the walls, winter wind moves through the town below. Smoke rises from distant chimneys. Dogs bark somewhere near the market square. Life continues beyond the hospital gates much as it always has. But inside these stone walls, Beneath beeswax candles and soot-black rafters, another kind of life continues too slower, quieter, and held together by routine, patience, and weary hands carrying warm bowls through the cold. Snow continues falling through the night. By morning, the hospital courtyard lies covered beneath a pale, uneven blanket broken only by footprints, cart tracks, and the wandering trails of chickens who appear delighted by weather that inconveniences everyone else. Frost clings to the well rope. Smoke rises thick from the chimneys into the colourless winter sky. You wake stiff beneath wool blankets in a small guest chamber above the outer hall. Somewhere below, bells mark the first prayers before dawn. The sound travels upward through stone and timber in slow, solemn waves. For a few quiet moments you simply listen. A patient coughs faintly in a nearby corridor. Someone carries firewood downstairs. Wind brushes softly against the shutters like fingers across old parchment. Then comes the smell. Rosemary, mint, vinegar, and something sharper beneath it all. The infirmary. After breakfast of oat bread and weak ale warmed beside the fire, Mathieu leads you across the snowy courtyard toward a low stone building attached to the eastern wall. Icicles hang from the roof edge like little glass daggers. The healers work there, he says, though heaven alone decides whether they succeed. Inside, warmth and herb smoke wrap around you immediately. Bundles of dried plants hang from the rafters: lavender, sage, thyme, mugwort, feverfew, saint, johnswort. Clay jars line wooden shelves beside folded cloths, beeswax candles, and little stoppered bottles filled with oils dark as amber. The infirmary smells like a forest attempting medicine. At the far table stands Sister Agnes. Unlike the brothers, she wears a dark wool veil beneath a heavy apron stained with herbs and wine. Grey hair escapes near her temples. Her hands move steadily while crushing dried leaves with a stone mortar. "You've brought another curious traveller," she says without looking up. "Better curious than screaming," Mathieu replies. "Depends on the traveller." She finally glances toward you, eyes sharp as sewing needles despite her age. "Wash your hands before touching anything," she says, "and if Brother Lucian offers you one of his tonics, pretend sudden death elsewhere requires your immediate attention." From across the room, an offended voice protests. "My tonics are perfectly respectable." Brother Lucien appears from behind a hanging cloth curtain carrying a tray of clay cups. He is thin, ink-fingered, and permanently smells faintly of garlic. 3 patients slept peacefully after my last preparation. Sister Agnes snorts. Yes, for 14 hours. The infirmary bustles quietly around them. One novice sorts dried herbs into little linen sacks. Another boils water over the hearth while carefully avoiding eye contact with the jar full of leeches resting nearby on a shelf. You notice the leeches immediately. They drift lazily through cloudy water with the unsettling calm of creatures fully confident about future employment. Lucien follows your gaze proudly. Useful for balancing excess blood and overheated humours. "Do they work?" you ask. "No one can quite agree," Sister Agnes mutters. Yet despite her scepticism, the leeches remain. Medieval medicine rarely discards anything completely. If one remedy fails, another simply joins it beside the shelf, prayer beside herbs, bloodletting beside holy relics, honey poultices beside whispered charms against evil spirits. The result resembles a kitchen pantry organized by exhausted philosophers. Mathieu leads you deeper into the infirmary where several patients rest on narrow beds near the fire. One elderly man sleeps beneath heavy blankets while warm stones wrapped in cloth rest beside his feet. A woman drinks willow bark tea slowly under the supervision of a novice. Another patient sits quietly while Sister Agnes rubs lavender oil into trembling hands. She has not slept properly in weeks, Agnes explains softly. The woman closes her eyes at the scent. Some swear lavender quiets restless spirits. Others believe pleasant smells strengthen the heart against melancholy. Even now, it is hard to tell where medicine ends and comfort begins. Perhaps the people here stopped trying to separate them long ago. At a side table, Lucian prepares another remedy. He mixes wine, crushed herbs, honey, and powdered roots into a steaming cup while explaining each ingredient with scholarly confidence. This for agitation, this for cold humours, this to warm the stomach. And that you ask, pointing toward a dark green powder. Lucian hesitates. We are less certain about that one. Sister Agnes calls from across the room. It gives everyone terrible gas. The old healer sighs heavily. Medicine requires sacrifice. Nearby, a nervous novice attempts his first leech treatment beneath Agnes's supervision. The patient, remarkably calm about the entire situation, watches the leech attached to his arm. I still say they look too pleased with themselves, he mutters. The novice nearly faints. Agnes catches the bowl before disaster strikes. You breathe through your nose, she tells him firmly. The patient should not be comforting you. Winter light filters weakly through narrow windows while the day passes slowly inside the herb-scented warmth. Patients come and go throughout the morning seeking ointments, teas, blessings, or simply reassurance. One woman asks for rosemary against bad dreams. A stable hand requests salve for aching joints. A frightened mother arrives carrying a little charm bag sewn with tiny crosses, asking whether her son's nightmares might be caused by wandering spirits from the marshlands. Agnes answers gently. Nightmares visit everyone eventually. Still, she adds lavender to the charm pouch before returning it. Practical kindness again. No dramatic certainty. Only people trying. By afternoon, snow clouds darken the sky outside. Candles are lit early against the dimness. Lucian reads softly from a weathered medical manuscript while grinding herbs beside the fire. You glimpse strange diagrams sketched across the pages, human figures marked with symbols of stars, moons, and planetary influences. Certain physicians believe the heavens affect the humours, he explains. You treat troubled minds according to astrology. Sometimes. Sister Agnes raises an eyebrow. And sometimes, she says dryly, people survive despite astrology. A patient near the hearth suddenly begins singing under his breath. Softly at first. Then louder. Not unpleasant singing, just fragile and uncertain. The tune drifts through the warm herb smoke while snow taps faintly against the shutters. No one stops him. Agnes continues sorting bandages. Lucian stirs his tonic. The novices carry firewood and folded linens through the room. Life simply bends around the song. And standing there among hanging herbs, steaming remedies, beeswax candles, and weary healers balancing faith with guesswork beneath a winter sky, you begin understanding how medieval care survives at all, not through mastery over illness, but through stubborn persistence against it. Keep the fire warm. Keep the kettle boiling. Keep trying another remedy. Keep listening when someone sings through the dark. By the time the chapel bell calls for evening prayer, the infirmary windows have turned dark blue with cold. Snow still falls beyond the glass, fine and silent now, settling over the courtyard stones and along the chapel roof in soft white seams. Sister Agnes sends you out with a warning not to step on the icy threshold, which of course makes you immediately stare at the threshold so intensely that you nearly trip over your own cloak. Medieval survival often depends less on courage than on not being personally defeated by a doorway. Mathieu waits outside beneath the covered passage with his lantern raised. Service will be full tonight, he says. Snow unsettles some, keeps others calm. No one can quite agree why. You follow him toward the chapel through the dim yard. The hospital has grown quieter after dusk, though not silent. From one ward comes the scrape of a bench being moved. From another, a low murmur of voices rises and fades. Smoke bends sideways from the chimneys, carrying the smell of wet wood and boiled herbs into the winter air. The chapel door opens into warmth, candlelight, and stone. Inside, beeswax candles burn thickly before the painted altar. Their flames tremble in little golden rows, reflecting upon old icons darkened by years of incense smoke. Rushes cover the floor, freshened for the evening, and someone has scattered dried rosemary near the entrance so each footstep releases a faint green scent. Patients, brothers, servants, and a few townsfolk gather together beneath the low arches. Some kneel, some sit, some stand uncertainly near the wall, as if unsure whether heaven prefers neat arrangements. A young woman from the ward clutches a wool blanket around her shoulders. Thomas sits near the front, watching a candle flame with careful attention. The old man with tiny bells sewn into his sleeves rests both hands on his knees, perfectly still except when the bells give the smallest silver chime. A reliquary stands near the altar tonight. It is a little gilded box shaped like a chapel, set upon embroidered cloth and guarded by 2 candles. Mathieu whispers that it contains a splinter said to be from the staff of a wandering saint, who once cured a knight of madness after the knight spent 7 years trying to marry a walnut tree. You look at him. He shrugs. Some legends arrive already tired. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the relic is genuine. The town believes it when convenient, doubts it when drunk, and reveres it most during illness, which is perhaps how many relics survive. The priest begins the service in a voice low enough to feel like part of the walls. Latin rolls through the chapel slowly, syllables rising into the rafters with the candle smoke. You do not understand every word, but the rhythm carries its own meaning: rest, sorrow, mercy, endurance. The people around you breathe more evenly as the chant continues. A novice moves among the gathered patients with a small bowl of holy water, touching drops to bowed heads. Some receive it solemnly. One man flinches, then laughs softly at himself. Another asks whether holy water works better if warmed first, since cold holiness seems unnecessarily stern. Brother Aldrich, standing nearby, whispers, "I have often thought the same." The priest pretends not to hear. During the prayers, names are spoken aloud. Some belong to the sick inside the walls, some to family members who left offerings, some to the dead, remembered in candlelight because memory itself is a kind of shelter. You hear Edric the scribe murmur each name from a parchment roll, his ink-stained finger moving down the list. The young woman in the faded blue shawl begins weeping silently when one name is read. Sister Agnes, seated behind her, places a steady hand upon her shoulder. No sermon thunder comes, no fierce accusation. Only the old priest speaking gently about troubled souls being no less known to God than kings, merchants, or bishops with excellent dinner tables. This seems to comfort some and confuse others. A patient near the wall whispers, "Does God know where I put my shoes?" Mathieu answers softly, almost certainly. "Good, ask him." The chant resumes. In this age, the treatment of troubled minds is often woven tightly with the health of the soul. People speak of sin, possession, melancholy, bad humours, moon influence, grief, enchantment, and divine trial as if all belong to the same heavy cloak. No one has one clear map. Instead, they carry fragments: a saint's name, a herb bundle, a candle, a psalm, a leather restraint, a warm bowl of pottage. And here in the chapel, all those fragments seem to gather under one dim roof, After the prayers, the priest lifts the reliquary. Each patient may approach if they wish. Some do, some do not. Thomas touches the cloth beneath the relic with trembling fingers. The old man with the bells bows but does not touch it. A quiet patient who has not spoken all day suddenly asks whether saints ever grow tired of being asked for help. The priest lowers the reliquary slightly. I imagine they understand tiredness very well. That answer seems good enough. You watch as one woman presses a tiny pilgrim badge against the gilded box. Another leaves a ribbon. A servant places a candle for her brother, who was sent here after wandering into the marshes and refusing to come home because, he claimed, the reeds were teaching him law. Even now, it's hard to tell whether these rituals heal the mind, soothe the family, or simply create a place where fear can kneel without shame. Maybe that's not nothing. Outside, wind presses snow against the chapel door. Inside, the candles burn lower and warmer. The service ends not with a grand dismissal, but with a slow dispersing, like embers shifting in a hearth. Some patients return to the wards at once. Others linger. You remain near the back while Mathieu helps an elderly man rise from the bench. Sister Agnes gathers 2 sleeping patients beneath blankets. Brother Lucien carefully collects the candle stubs, because even half-burned wax is too precious to waste. The suspicious monastery cat appears near the altar, examines the reliquary with theological indifference, and settles beside the warm stone wall. Before leaving, you glance once more toward the painted saints above the altar. Their flat golden halos gleam in the candlelight, calm and unreadable. Behind you, Thomas whispers to Mathieu, the faces are quieter tonight. Mathieu does not praise him too loudly or make too much of it. He only nods. Then we're grateful for a quieter night. You step back into the corridor where the air smells of wax, snow, and old stone. The chapel door closes softly behind you. From somewhere deep in the hospital, a lullaby begins again, faint and wavering, threading itself through the winter dark. Morning arrives beneath a pale sky washed nearly white with snowlight. The storm has finally passed. You wake to the scrape of shovels in the courtyard and the distant clucking of outraged chickens being relocated from a drift beside the kitchen wall. Somewhere below, Brother Aldrich loudly accuses the weather of personal insult. It snows every winter, Mathieu says while fastening his cloak. Yes, Aldrich grumbles, and every winter I object. The hospital feels slower this morning, softer somehow. Snow muffles sound beneath its heavy blanket, turning even footsteps into quiet crunches across the courtyard. Smoke rises straight upward in the still air. Frost feathers the chapel windows in delicate white veins. After breakfast, Mathieu suggests walking the grounds before the next snowfall arrives. People grow restless indoors too long, he explains. Outside, the courtyard has become its own little winter world enclosed within stone walls. Servants beat blankets free of snow near the laundry lines. A novice scatters grain for chickens while muttering prayers that they stop pecking his boots. 2 patients slowly carry buckets from the well beneath careful supervision, their breath fogging the cold air. You notice that many patients are allowed into the yard during calmer hours. Some simply sit wrapped in cloaks near the walls, turning pale faces toward the weak winter sun. Others help with small chores. One elderly woman carefully brushes snow from the chapel steps using a broom nearly taller than she is. She insists upon it every morning, Mathieu says quietly, claims saints dislike slippery entrances. No one argues. She once struck Brother Lucien with the broom. The old woman lifts the broom slightly in warning as you pass. Wise enough, you keep walking. Near the centre of the yard stands a little fenced herb garden buried mostly beneath snowdrifts. Wooden markers poke through the frost where lavender, sage, mint, and fennel sleep beneath winter soil. Sister Agnes kneels there anyway, checking the coverings laid over the roots. You can't possibly garden in this weather, you say. Watch me, she replies. The woman treats winter like a personal rivalry. Beyond the herb beds lies a narrow covered walkway circling the yard. Patients stroll there during bad weather. You join several moving slowly beneath the wooden roof while snowmelt drips rhythmically from the eaves. A thin man beside you pauses every few steps to tap the posts exactly twice with his knuckles. For luck, he explains before you can ask, or balance, maybe both. No one corrects him. Another patient carries a tiny cloth pouch around her neck stuffed with dried rowan berries and bits of iron nail. Against wandering spirits, Mathieu whispers. Do spirits fear nails? Apparently they dislike craftsmanship. The winter sunlight brightens briefly through the clouds, casting silver light across the snow. For a moment the hospital seems almost peaceful enough to forget its purpose. Then somewhere above a shout echoes from an upper window. Every head in the courtyard turns instinctively. A young attendant appears at the opening, speaking softly to someone unseen inside. After a tense moment the shutters close again. The courtyard slowly exhales. Bad mornings happen, Mathieu says. No further explanation follows. Life simply bends around the interruption and continues onward. Near the laundry lines, several patients help shake frost from blankets before hanging them. The faded cloth snaps sharply in the cold wind. One patient carefully smooths wrinkles from each blanket with surprising tenderness. He worked as a tailor once, says an attendant nearby, still remembers every stitch. Even now, it is hard to tell where memory ends and illness begins. Pieces of former lives remain everywhere here. Old habits, trades, songs, prayers, fears. The hospital holds not just troubled minds, but interrupted stories. You continue walking beneath the covered passage until a familiar sound reaches you. Singing, soft at first, then clearer. In a side corner of the courtyard, several patients sit together near the woodshed while an older woman hums a slow winter ballad. One man taps rhythm against a bucket, another watches snow slide from the roof with complete fascination. Mathieu smiles faintly. Music settles some of them. And the others, they complain about the singing. You sit nearby a while, listening. The melody drifts through the cold air alongside the crack of splitting firewood and distant monastery bells. No polished choir sings here. The voices wobble, pause, restart. Yet the sound carries warmth all the same. A shaggy brown dog suddenly trots into the yard through the half-open gate. Several patients brighten instantly. Bruno, someone calls. The dog moves confidently from person to person, accepting pats with professional dignity. One patient shares crusts of bread from his pocket. Another wraps both arms around the animal's neck and buries his face in the thick fur. Town baker's dog, Mathieu explains. He visits whenever the gate's unwatched. Do the brothers mind? He catches rats. Therefore he possesses nearly unlimited forgiveness. Brother Aldrich appears carrying firewood and stops short upon seeing Bruno lounging beside the kitchen steps. That animal stole sausage from me yesterday. Bruno yawns. And he feels no remorse, Aldrich mutters darkly. Snow begins drifting again around midday, though lighter now. The courtyard slowly empties as attendants guide patients back indoors before the paths ice over. You help carry baskets of laundry toward the warming rooms where a damp cloth hangs from ceiling beams near the fires. The air inside smells richly of wet wool, smoke, lavender soap, and human closeness. A patient carefully folds linens beside you with near-perfect precision. My mother taught me corners matter, she says quietly. Then after a pause, I still dream about her kitchen sometimes. The statement hangs softly between you. No grand tragedy follows, no dramatic collapse, only memory surfacing briefly like a lantern through fog. Outside the narrow windows, snowflakes drift past the stone walls in endless silence. Inside, the hospital settles back into its winter rhythm blankets drying. Fires crackling, bowls warming beside the hearth. Patients moving gently through familiar routines while the world beyond the walls grows colder and whiter by the hour. And somewhere near the kitchens, Bruno the dog almost certainly steals another sausage. The snow remains for 3 more days. By the 4th morning, narrow paths have been worn through the courtyard drifts by countless boots carrying water, wood, food, and laundry between the buildings. Icicles hang crooked from the roofs like old teeth. The sky stays low and grey, pressing softly against the town and monastery alike. Inside the hospital, life settles into winter routine. You begin noticing the hours not by sunlight which rarely appears, but by bells, meals, prayers, and fires being fed. Prime, sext, vespers. The rhythm repeats gently enough that even the anxious patients seem carried along by it, like leaves floating downstream. This morning Mathieu brings you to a small chamber tucked beside the main hall. The records room, he says. Edric will tolerate visitors if approached carefully and not fed too much optimism. The chamber smells of ink, candle wax, old parchment, and dust warmed by the hearth. Shelves line the walls from floor to ceiling, crowded with rolled documents tied in faded ribbons. Wooden chests sit beneath the tables, each marked with careful painted symbols. At the centre of it all sits Edric. The scribe hunches over a parchment ledger so large it resembles a sleeping calf. His sleeves are rolled to the elbows despite the cold. Ink stains his fingers, cuffs, and somehow one cheek. He does not look up immediately. "Close the door," he mutters. "Draughts make the ink sulk." You obey. The room grows quieter at once, broken only by the scratch of his quill and the faint hiss of the fire. Edric writes with extraordinary concentration. Every letter appears deliberate, measured, almost carved into the page rather than merely written. Beside him stand little clay pots filled with powdered pigments, sealing wax, sharpened goose quills, and tiny knives for scraping mistakes from parchment. You record the patients you ask softly. And the costs of oats, repairs to roofs, donations from nobles, how many candles vanish mysteriously each month, Brother Aldrich's annual war against salt merchants. Without looking up, he gestures toward the towering stacks around him. Institutions survive on records nearly as much as prayers. Mathieu leaves you there after a while, disappearing back into the wards. The scribe continues writing in silence long enough that you begin wondering whether conversation itself requires official permission. Finally he sighs. "Since you're clearly determined to stand there, you may as well hand me the blue ribbon ledger." You locate it from the shelf beside the hearth. The leather binding is cracked smooth from years of handling. Inside, neat rows of names stretch across the parchment pages beside dates, notes, and payments. Some entries are painfully brief. Marjorie, daughter of Thomas Miller, winter fever, restless visions. Henry of Blackwater, violent episodes after battlefield injury. Unknown pilgrim woman, found near river shrine. Some remain only weeks. Others continue page after page through the years. No one can quite agree how many people recovered from such places because medieval records often blur together sorrow, illness, poverty, grief, and loneliness beneath the same ink. Yet here in Edric's careful writing, you glimpse something unexpectedly human attempts to remember. They become real once written, Edric says quietly. You glance toward him. He sharpens another quill with steady hands. Families forget sometimes, he continues, or pretend forgetting is kindness. The fire cracks softly, but if their names remain here, someone at least acknowledged they existed. Outside the tiny window, snow drifts past like pale ash. Edric shows you older volumes stored in a locked chest beneath the table. The parchment smells faintly of mildew and smoke. Some pages date back generations. You notice strange symbols in the margins beside certain entries. Crosses, stars, tiny moons. What are those? Observations, Edric replies. He turns several pages carefully. A moon symbol marks sleepless wandering, a cross for violent distress during prayers, a star for patients believed influenced by visions or heavenly signs. You believe that? The scribe shrugs faintly. I believe frightened people seek patterns. Even now, it's hard to tell whether the records reflect medical understanding or simply medieval attempts to organize uncertainty into manageable shapes. One entry catches your eye. A noble woman from decades earlier, kept 6 winters, released after pilgrimage, returned willingly the following spring. You ask about it. Edric leans back slightly, rubbing tired eyes. Some people feared the world beyond the walls more than the world within them. That answer lingers heavily. A knock sounds at the door. Brother Lucien enters carrying 2 steaming cups. Herb tea, he announces proudly, for mental clarity. Edric eyes the cup suspiciously. Last time your tea caused Brother Martin to hallucinate geese. Lucien looks offended. The geese were real. Not indoors. The old healer departs, muttering about ungrateful scholarship, while Edric reluctantly sips the tea anyway. You spend much of the afternoon in the records room while snowlight fades slowly outside. Patients occasionally arrive with messages or requests. One asks whether his sister has written. Another wishes to know the date of St. Bridget's feast. A quiet woman brings carved wooden spoons to trade for extra candle stubs. Edric handles each interaction with patient calm, though not especially warm patience. More the patience of a man who has accepted humanity as an untidy but permanent condition. At one point he opens a ledger containing payments from noble households. The sums surprise you. Some families pay enormous amounts for private rooms, imported medicines, and personal attendants. Others send nothing at all after delivering relatives through the gates. Does that anger you, you ask? Edric dips his quill again. Anger consumes ink, he says. I prefer accuracy. Outside, evening bells begin sounding through the snowy dark. The records room glows warmly now beneath candlelight. Wax drips slowly onto the tables. Shadows stretch long between the shelves. You notice tiny personal details hidden among the formal entries. Likes honey cakes. Sleeps easier near music. Afraid of thunder. Excellent with horses. Those little notes move you most of all. Not symptoms. Not diagnoses. Pieces of ordinary lives preserved beside the suffering. As the final bell of evening fades through the winter air, Edric closes the great ledger carefully and binds it shut with leather straps. There, he murmurs. The day recorded. The names remembered. Outside the hospital walls, snow continues falling over the town, the river, the frozen roads, and the dark forests beyond. But here inside the little records chamber, beneath candle smoke and ink-black rafters, human lives endure quietly in careful lines of parchment, while the winter night gathers close around the stone walls once more. 2 days later, the snow finally begins to thaw. Water drips steadily from the eaves all morning, tapping against barrels and courtyard stones with the patient rhythm of winter loosening its grip. The pathways through the hospital yard turn slushy beneath countless boots. Chickens reappear triumphantly from hiding, strutting through the mud as though personally responsible for the arrival of spring. After so many days enclosed by stone walls and smoke-dark corridors, Mathieu announces that supplies must be gathered from the town market. "You could use fresh air," he says. Brother Aldrich overhears while hauling turnips across the courtyard. "Fresh air is greatly overrated," he mutters. "Smells less like stew, though, which I admit is refreshing." Wrapped in heavy cloaks against the lingering cold, you descend the hill together toward the waking town below. Snow still clings to rooftops and shaded alleys, but the main streets churn with muddy slush now instead of ice. The market square hums with life. Canvas awnings flap in the wet wind. Merchants shout prices over one another while carts creak through puddles deep enough to drown optimism. Smoke rises from braziers where chestnuts roast beside strips of sizzling eel. The air smells of damp wool, horse manure, onions, fish brine, and hot bread fresh from the ovens. Compared to the hospital, the square feels loud almost to the point of violence. A blacksmith hammers iron nearby with alarming enthusiasm. A woman selling geese argues with a priest over weights and measures. Somewhere unseen, a child cries because medieval childhood apparently involves equal parts wonder and minor frostbite. Mathieu leads you between the crowded stalls, carrying a list folded carefully into his sleeve. Oats, salt, lamp oil, more vinegar if the price hasn't become sinful. And if it has, we pray over smaller portions. Several merchants recognize him immediately. Some greet him warmly, others less so. The fishmonger nods politely while wrapping smoked herring in cloth. "The brothers paid fair coin last season," he says. "I've no complaint." But farther along the square, a butcher lowers his voice as you approach. "You're still keeping those poor souls up there." Mathieu's expression remains calm. "We are—" The butcher shrugs uneasily while arranging cuts of meat across his table. "My cousin says one escaped last autumn. Wandered half the marsh speaking nonsense about angels inside trees." Old Perrin Mathieu asks. He returned the next morning after sleeping in a ditch. The butcher blinks. "Oh, also," Mathieu adds mildly, "he was a shepherd for 20 years. He spoke about trees long before arriving." You continue walking. That conversation repeats itself in different forms throughout the morning. Some townsfolk speak of the hospital with pity, others with fear, others with tired practicality. A woman purchasing candles quietly asks whether her sister still sings in the evenings. A cooper complains that disturbed patients scare customers away from the hill road. One merchant insists troubled minds spread through families like weak roofs during rain. No one can quite agree whether the hospital protects the town from danger or simply hides away suffering people prefer not to see. Near the cloth stalls, you overhear 2 apprentices whispering as Mathieu passes. "My father says they chain everyone inside. My uncle says monks drill holes into skulls. Your uncle drinks lamp oil. Only during festivals." Mathieu keeps walking without reacting. You hear these stories often. You ask quietly, "Every week? Does it bother you?" He considers this while inspecting onions at a produce cart. "Fear prefers simple tales," he says finally. "Reality usually arrives muddier." Which feels appropriate given the state of your boots. At the far edge of the market square stands a little shrine beneath a weather-darkened awning. Candles flicker before a painted saint while townsfolk leave offerings: coins, ribbons, tiny carved figures, crusts of bread. A woman kneels there holding a child's wool cap tightly in her hands. "For her son," Mathieu murmurs after a moment. "The boy was brought to us last winter after fever." The woman rises as you approach. "You're from the hospital." Mathieu nods gently. "How is he today?" "He slept well yesterday." The relief on her face arrives quietly but completely, like warmth spreading through cold hands. She presses 2 tiny beeswax candles into Mathieu's hands for the chapel, before disappearing back into the crowd. Even now, it is hard to tell whether families bring loved ones to the hospital out of hope, desperation, exhaustion, or all 3 tangled together. You stop briefly beside a bookseller's stall where damp manuscripts rest beneath tarred cloth covers. Brother Lucien, who joined the trip halfway down the hill despite claiming he hated markets, immediately vanishes among the books like a heron spotting fish. "Medical texts," he whispers excitedly. The bookseller eyes him suspiciously. "Last time you argued with my astrology charts for an hour, they were medically irresponsible charts. You called them an insult to the moon." Lucien stands by this judgment. Meanwhile, Bruno the baker's dog somehow appears beneath the stall table carrying half a sausage of uncertain origin. No one claims responsibility. Medieval markets operate on complicated moral systems regarding sausage ownership. By midday, the bells from the monastery ring faintly across the square. Snowmelt drips steadily from the rooftops now. Mud thickens beneath cartwheels. A wandering musician plays a fiddle near the fountain while children chase each other round puddles, despite several exhausted mothers attempting diplomacy. You stop beside a stall selling pilgrim badges and little charms against illness. Tiny lead saints, iron crosses, braided herbs, small silver moons to ward against madness caused by night wandering. The old woman running the stall squints toward Mathieu. "Hospital folk should take rowan bundles," she declares. "Keeps troubled spirits from clinging." Lucien mutters, "So does bathing." The woman ignores him entirely. As the afternoon darkens toward evening, your baskets slowly fill with supplies: salt wrapped in cloth, oats, candles, dried peas, bundles of rosemary and lavender for the infirmary. The ordinary things that keep life moving. And through it all, the hospital remains present in the town's conversations like weather feared, needed, misunderstood, unavoidable. On the climb back uphill, the market noise fades gradually behind you. Snowmelt trickles down the roadside gutters. Smoke curls from chimney tops into the grey sky. Ahead, the hospital walls rise once more above the town. Not hidden exactly. Not welcomed entirely either. Just standing there in the cold, carrying its troubled souls, warm kitchens, restless nights, prayers, records, herb smoke, and weary routines through another medieval winter while the world below continues arguing about what it truly means. That night the wind changes. You hear it first while unloading sacks into the storehouse beside the kitchens, a long, low moan threading through the stone passages and rattling the shutters against their iron latches. Snowmelt has turned to freezing rain again. By dusk, the hospital sits wrapped in darkness and dripping cold. Brother Aldrich declares this an offence against soup weather, though no one is entirely sure what that means. Inside, candles burn earlier than usual. The corridors glow amber beneath their trembling light, while attendants move steadily through the wards carrying extra blankets and warmed bricks wrapped in cloth. Fires are fed until sparks whirl upward into the soot-black rafters. Every door groans differently in the damp weather, and over time you begin recognizing them like familiar voices. One hinge squeals sharply. Another knocks twice before closing. The old chapel door sighs like a tired ox. Night inside the hospital has its own peculiar rhythm. During daylight, routines carry people forward almost automatically: meals, chores, prayers, errands, laundry, firewood. But after dark, when the corridors quiet and the windows reflect only candlelight, troubled thoughts seem to grow louder. Mathieu says little while making his rounds. You follow him through the upper ward carrying a lantern whose weak flame trembles with every draught. Patients settle slowly into their beds beneath wool blankets stuffed with straw and feathers. Some sleep quickly, others remain awake listening to the storm scratch against the walls. A woman near the hearth twists strips of cloth nervously between her fingers. "Too windy," she whispers. Mathieu kneels beside her. "The walls are thick. The river spirits travel in storms. Then they'll freeze before reaching the windows." She considers this seriously. "Good. Not every comfort here comes from truth. Sometimes calm itself matters more." Farther down the ward, Thomas sits awake on his bed, staring toward the ceiling beams. "The faces again?" Mathieu asks quietly. "Only shadows tonight." "That's an improvement." Thomas nods uncertainly. You notice a beeswax candle burning beside his bed, set carefully inside a little clay holder. Several patients keep candles through the night if fears worsen after sunset. The brothers ration wax carefully but rarely refuse outright. No one sleeps well frightened, Mathieu says. The storm deepens as evening prayers end. Rain rattles across the shutters hard enough to sound briefly like thrown gravel. Somewhere outside in the darkness, a loose gate bangs rhythmically against stone until a novice finally runs through the courtyard to tie it shut. When you pass the infirmary, you glimpse Sister Agnes still awake mixing herbs beside the hearth. "Restless night, you ask?" "Barometric misery," she replies without looking up. You wait. She notices your confusion. The old Roman physicians blamed weather for headaches and agitation. Personally, I blame existence. Brother Lucien snores softly in a chair nearby with an open medical manuscript sliding from his lap. One hand still clutches a garlic bulb for reasons known only to him. You continue onward. The upper corridor grows quieter now except for occasional coughs, murmured prayers, and the endless whisper of rain beyond the walls. Lantern light stretches thin along the stone floor. Rushes rustle softly beneath your boots. Near midnight, singing begins again. Not loud, just one voice somewhere in the lower ward humming a slow, melancholy tune. Another patient joins faintly from farther down the corridor. The melody drifts through the building like smoke, wandering from room to room. No one stops it. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the music comforts the patients or the attendants more. You sit a while beside the hearth in the main ward while Mathieu checks the doors and windows. Several patients remain awake nearby. The old man with the tiny bells sewn into his sleeves carefully polishes them with a scrap of cloth. "Storms wake memories," he says suddenly. You ask what kind? He studies the bells a long moment. The kind that arrive uninvited. Then he falls silent again. Across the room, another patient mutters prayers beneath his blankets. A woman requests warm water because she believes cold dreams creep through frozen toes. Brother Aldrich, passing through with a kettle, declares this medically ridiculous but spiritually understandable. The suspicious monastery cat prowls between beds hunting imaginary enemies beneath the benches. Bruno the dog, somehow once again inside despite several rules against it, sleeps beside the kitchen hearth with all the confidence of a creature who knows everyone secretly loves him. Hours pass slowly. Night work inside the hospital is mostly waiting. Waiting for fevers to break. Waiting for frightened minds to settle. Waiting for storms to pass. Waiting to see whether screams, tears, silence, or laughter will arrive before dawn. Mathieu finally joins you near the fire sometime after midnight. His face looks older in the candlelight. "You ever fear becoming exhausted by all this?" you ask quietly. He thinks for a long while before answering. "Every winter." The fire cracks softly between you. "But then morning comes," he says. "Someone needs bread. Someone needs bandages. Someone laughs at something foolish. The work continues. No heroic speech follows. Just tired honesty. From deeper within the ward, Thomas suddenly speaks into the darkness. Mathieu. Yes. Stay awake a little longer. The brother nods once. I will. And so the night continues. Rain whispers over the roofs. Candles burn steadily lower. The bells in the chapel tower remain silent until dawn. Somewhere a patient cries briefly in sleep before settling again. Sister Agnes moves through the infirmary with lantern light and lavender oil. Brother Lucian wakes just long enough to accuse invisible draughts of stealing his garlic. The hospital endures the storm the same way it endures everything else, through small acts repeated patiently in the dark. Keep the fire lit. Keep watch beside frightened beds. Keep answering when someone whispers your name after midnight. Outside the walls, the medieval world sleeps beneath freezing rain and drifting fog. But inside the hospital, beneath old beams and wavering candlelight, weary souls remain awake together while the long winter night slowly carries them toward morning. Morning comes pale and dripping after the storm, with water sliding from every roof edge and the courtyard stones shining like dark river pebbles beneath the grey sky. The air smells clean for once, washed of smoke just enough that you notice the sharp scent of thawing earth beneath the snow. Mathieu has slept perhaps 2 hours, though he refuses to admit this. I slept, he says while tightening the strap of his cloak. You nodded at a wall. It was a restful wall. Today, a small party leaves the hospital for a shrine beyond the town, where a saint's spring bubbles from beneath an old yew tree. A few patients are believed calm enough to travel. Others are carried there in prayers alone, their names written on parchment slips and tucked into a pouch at Brother Edric's belt. No one can quite agree whether the spring truly heals troubled minds. Some swear a girl once drank from it and remembered her mother's face after 7 silent years. Others say the miracle was invented by innkeepers along the Pilgrim Road, which would be very medieval of them. Still, preparations begin carefully. Sister Agnes wraps vials of lavender oil in cloth. Brother Lucian packs herb cakes for emergencies, though Aldrich insists hunger is the only emergency Lucian reliably creates. Thomas joins the group, quiet but steady, with his eyes fixed mostly on the road ahead. The old man with the sleeve bells comes too, each tiny chime sounding whenever he adjusts his cloak. You walk out through the hospital gate just after prime. The town below still glistens with meltwater. Market stalls are only beginning to open, their canvas roofs sagging under cold drops. Bruno the dog trots after you for half the hill before being lured away by the baker's daughter and what appears to be a morally persuasive heel of bread. Beyond the gate, the Pilgrim Road runs east between fields rimmed with frost. Bare hedgerows twist along the path. Crows lift from the furrows in ragged black flurries. Every boot step sinks slightly into mud, and every cart rut holds a thin skin of ice. The journey is slow. That is the point. A fast pilgrimage would feel suspicious, almost like cheating. Medieval holiness appears to prefer sore feet, bad weather, and at least one person loudly regretting their footwear. You pause at a roadside cross where travellers have tied ribbons, scraps of wool, and little wooden tokens to the post. Mathieu adds one of Edric's parchment slips to a crack in the wood. The inked names disappear into the weathered grain. Thomas watches him. Will the saint read them? Perhaps, and Mathieu says, "What if saints dislike damp parchment? Then heaven has better filing methods than we do." That answer seems to satisfy him. By midday, the road enters a narrow belt of woodland. Bare branches lace overhead, dripping softly onto your hood. The earth smells of moss, wet bark, and old leaves rotting sweetly underfoot. Somewhere in the trees, a stream runs hidden beneath ice. The shrine appears quietly. No grand church, no golden tower. Just a small stone chapel beside an ancient yew tree, its trunk twisted wide enough to shelter secrets. Beneath the roots, water flows from a carved spout into a shallow basin green with age. Pilgrims gather there already, a limping soldier, 2 mothers with children, an old woman carrying a cage with a very offended hen, and a merchant who claims he's only passing by while clearly clutching 3 prayer ribbons. A hermit priest tends the place. He wears a patched cloak and has eyebrows like frost-covered hedges. Hospital folk, he says as Mathieu bows. 3 walking, Mathieu replies, many carried in name. The priest accepts Edric's pouch of parchment slips and lays it beside the spring. Each patient approaches in turn. The old man with the bells kneels slowly, touching wet fingers to his forehead. The sound of his sleeve chimes mingles with the trickle of water. Thomas drinks from a wooden cup, pauses, then drinks again. Cold, he says. Most miracles are poorly heated, the hermit priest replies. A young woman from the hospital presses a pilgrim badge against the basin, then ties it to her cloak. Such badges matter on the roads. They prove where you have been, what saint you sought, what hope you carried. Some people collect them with devotion. Others seem to collect them the way merchants collect excuses. Sister Agnes rubs lavender oil into Thomas's hands while the priest chants a blessing. Brother Lucien watches the spring thoughtfully, likely considering whether holy water could improve one of his tonics. The answer is probably yes, though only because almost anything would. You kneel near the basin and touch the water yourself. It is painfully cold. For a moment, everything narrows to that sensation. Cold water on fingertips, moss beneath knees, candle smoke drifting from the chapel door, wind moving through yew branches overhead. No thunder cracks. No heavenly light spills across the mud. No one rises suddenly cured. Instead, Thomas breathes a little easier. The young woman smiles faintly at the sound of the stream. The old man closes his eyes while his sleeve bells grow still. And perhaps, in this world, that is miracle enough for one grey afternoon. Even now, it is hard to tell whether shrine healing changes the afflicted, the caretakers, or the families watching in helpless hope. But the journey gives suffering a shape. It lets people walk toward something instead of merely waiting behind locked doors. Before leaving, the hermit priest gives each traveller a sprig of dried yew wrapped with thread. For protection on the road, he says. Sister Agnes accepts hers gravely. Lucien asks whether it also treats headaches. It treats arrogance if chewed unwisely, the priest says. Lucien pockets it without chewing. The return journey feels quieter. Mist gathers early between the trees. The patients walk slowly, tired from effort and cold air. Mathieu keeps pace beside Thomas without speaking much. You hear only boots in mud, distant crows, and the soft chime of tiny sleeve bells. As the hospital walls come back into view above the town, dusk begins settling over the roofs. Smoke rises blue from chimneys. The chapel bell rings vespers, its sound carrying through the wet air like a hand extended in the dark. You pass through the gate with cold feet, aching legs, and the scent of yew still clinging faintly to your cloak. No one announces a cure. No one claims certainty. But supper waits warm in the refectory. Candles burn in the chapel. Names rest at the shrine beside running water, and for tonight, Thomas walks through the hospital gate without looking once toward the dark windows. The thaw does not last. 3 mornings after the pilgrimage, winter returns with sharp winds sweeping across the hills and freezing the muddy roads hard as stone. Frost whitens the courtyard before dawn. Water buckets form thin skins of ice overnight. Brother Aldrich nearly loses a boot attempting to rescue cabbages from the kitchen storehouse, and speaks of the incident as though he survived open warfare. Inside the hospital, the fires burn constantly now. You begin recognizing which hearths smoke too much, which doors stick in cold weather, which patients sleep lightly whenever the wind changes direction. Life narrows in winter. The world becomes walls, blankets, candlelight, and endurance. Late one afternoon, Mathieu asks you to accompany him to the manor hall below the town. The court meets today, he says quietly, for criminals, for decisions. The tone of his voice suggests that sometimes those become the same thing. You descend the hill through brittle cold air while bells ring faintly behind you. Frost crunches beneath your boots. The river below the town carries broken plates of ice drifting slowly downstream like pale, shattered mirrors. The manor hall stands beside the square, larger than most buildings in town and warmer only in theory. Smoke hangs thick beneath the rafters. Rushes cover the floor in damp layers mixed with mud tracked in from dozens of boots. Villagers crowd the benches. A reeve sits at the front beside the local priest and two manor officials wrapped in fur-lined cloaks. Wax candles burn along the long table, their flames wavering whenever the door opens to admit another gust of winter air. Edric the scribe is already present, arranging parchment sheets with grim concentration. "You came willingly," he asks as you enter. Apparently, Mathieu replies, "The court handles many matters today: land disputes, stolen hens, unpaid tolls, accusations involving suspicious goats. Medieval justice spends an astonishing amount of time discussing livestock with the seriousness of royal diplomacy. But eventually the room quiets. A family steps forward. You recognize the mother immediately from the shrine by the market, the woman who carried her son's wool cap weeks earlier. Now the boy himself stands beside her. He cannot be older than 16. Thin, pale, eyes hollow with exhaustion. His hands twitch constantly against his sleeves. The reeve clears his throat. "Your son has disturbed the town repeatedly," he says, wandering at night, speaking confusion, entering homes uninvited. "He's frightened," the mother whispers. A butcher from the market stands to object. "He frightened my wife half to death. He sat in my barn speaking to the oxen." Another villager mutters. "Oxen are excellent listeners," Brother Aldrich whispers from behind you. "Somehow he has arrived carrying hot onions in a sack. No one questions this anymore." The priest asks the boy gently whether he understands where he is. The boy nods after a long pause. "I hear things at night," he says quietly. The hall grows still. No one can quite agree where illness ends and danger begins in this world. Some see troubled minds as vulnerable souls needing protection. Others see unpredictability, risk, shame, or divine punishment. Most people carry several beliefs at once, tangled together like winter fishing nets. The reeve turns toward Mathieu. "Can the hospital take him?" Mathieu studies the boy carefully before answering. "For a time." The mother closes her eyes in relief so sudden it almost looks painful. But not everyone in the hall agrees. A merchant rises sharply from the back benches. "The hospital grows too full already. We pay enough in grain and taxes." A farmer mutters that some patients never return home once admitted. Another insists wandering madness spreads through families like rot through apples. Edric scratches steadily across the parchment, recording every complaint in neat black lines. The boy himself remains silent now, staring toward the fire. Even now, it is hard to tell whether places like the hospital exist primarily to heal the afflicted or calm the fears of everyone else. The priest finally speaks. "Would you rather leave him freezing in the streets?" No one answers immediately. Wind rattles the shutters hard enough to make the candles flicker. Somewhere outside, a dog barks near the frozen square. At last the Reeve nods heavily. The hospital will receive him until spring, cost shared between manor and family. The mother begins quietly crying into her gloves. The boy looks neither relieved nor frightened, only tired. Afterward, while the hall returns to arguments about property lines and suspicious geese, Mathieu approaches the family near the doorway. "We'll prepare a bed tonight," he says gently. The mother grips his sleeve. "Will he recover?" Mathieu does not lie. "We will care for him." Some promises are smaller than miracles. Often they matter more. Outside the manor hall, evening gathers blue and cold across the town. Frost sharpens along the roofs. Market stalls stand shuttered against the wind. Smoke drifts low over the streets like grey cloth. The boy walks uphill beside you toward the hospital, carrying a small bundle tied with a rope. Everything he owns fits beneath one arm. "You've been there long?" he asks quietly. "Only a while." "Is it terrible?" You glance toward Mathieu. The brother answers first. "Some days are." The honesty seems to comfort the boy strangely. As you climb the hill, the hospital bell begins ringing vespers through the darkening air. Candlelight glows faintly behind the narrow windows above. At the gate, Sister Agnes waits with blankets already folded over one arm. "You're freezing," she says to the boy immediately. "I'm fine." Terrible liar. She guides him gently inside before he can argue further. The gates close behind you with a heavy iron sound. Inside the courtyard, snow crunches softly beneath your boots while smoke rises warm from the kitchen chimneys. Patients cross between buildings carrying firewood under lantern light. Someone sings faintly from the laundry hall. Life continues, not grandly, not triumphantly, just steadily. And standing there beneath the winter sky while another weary soul passes through the hospital gates carrying fear, exhaustion, and the fragile hope of shelter, you begin understanding why the records in Edric's room matter so much. Because each name marks a moment when someone, somewhere, chose not to leave another human being alone in the cold. Winter tightens around the hospital like a clenched hand. The roads beyond the town grow harder each morning, frozen into ridges sharp enough to jar teeth loose from careless travellers. Frost blooms thick across the chapel windows before dawn. Even the river moves sluggishly now beneath plates of grey ice drifting through the reeds. Inside the hospital walls, preparation becomes everything. Storehouses are checked constantly, firewood counted, candles trimmed carefully to avoid waste. The brothers speak of oats and salt with the same gravity other men reserve for warfare. Because, Brother Aldrich explains while carrying sacks through the courtyard, winter is warfare, only with more cabbage. You spend much of the day helping near the lower storehouse beside the kitchens. The room smells richly of dried peas, onions, apples stored in straw, smoked fish hanging from rafters, and cold stone. Barrels line the walls in careful rows marked with charcoal symbols. Bundles of herbs dry overhead beside strings of garlic. A novice named Peter kneels beside an open chest counting candles one by one with visible despair. "We had more yesterday." "You always say that," says Edric from nearby. "Because yesterday we always had more." Edric records the supplies while warming one ink-stained hand over a lantern. The scribe looks even paler than usual in winter light. Yet his ledger remains immaculate despite the freezing cold and the occasional turnip rolling unexpectedly across the floor. 6 barrels oats, he mutters while writing. 4 smoked hams, 2 wheels cheese, 1 suspicious onion. Peter examines the onion. It does look guilty. The storehouse work continues steadily through the afternoon. Patients help where they can. One carries bundles of kindling, another folds wool blankets near the hearth upstairs. The tailor who smooths every wrinkle repairs torn cloaks with tiny perfect stitches beside the kitchen fire. Routine again. Always routine. Even now, it's hard to tell whether the work exists because the hospital needs labour or because human beings endure winter better when given purpose. Outside, snow begins falling once more. Soft flakes drift through the courtyard while lanterns are lit early beneath the covered passages. You help Mathieu haul additional straw into the upper wards where drafts creep beneath the doors at night. A nervous patient follows close behind, carrying little charms woven from rushes and dried herbs. For protection, she explains. Against the cold, you ask. Against things that enter with the cold. No one laughs at her. In winter, old beliefs grow stronger. Patients whisper about wandering spirits crossing frozen rivers. Servants hang rowan branches above doorways. One novice refuses to pass the cemetery wall after sunset unless carrying a candle blessed at Candlemas. Brother Lucian insists garlic prevents evil influences. Sister Agnes insists garlic prevents people from standing too close to Lucian. The argument remains unresolved. Near dusk, the chapel fills with the warm scent of beeswax and pine boughs hung along the walls against winter gloom. Patients gather there more often now after dark, drawn toward light and company while storms close around the hills. Tonight, a fire burns in the courtyard brazier too, its flames snapping sharply in the cold air. Several patients warm their hands there beneath thick cloaks, while snow settles quietly across the rooftops. The young boy from the manor court sits among them. His name is Colin, you learn. He speaks little during his first days, though he startles less often now when doors close suddenly. Thomas sometimes sits beside him in silence near the hearth. No one forces conversation between them. Perhaps they understand each other too well already. You join Mathieu carrying extra blankets toward the upper ward when distant bells suddenly drift through the snowy dark. Not the hospital bells. Travellers. A small wagon arrives at the gate carrying pilgrims delayed by weather. Their horse steams heavily in the cold while snow clings thick to their cloaks. One woman immediately bursts into tears upon seeing the warm lights inside the walls. "You've room?" asks the driver hopefully. Brother Aldrich sighs the sigh of a man who already knows the answer. We always somehow do. Soon the guest house fills again with dripping boots, steaming cloaks, and exhausted travellers warming themselves beside the fire. The hospital survives partly because medieval roads are cruel places in winter. Shelter becomes sacred quickly once the snow deepens. One pilgrim notices the patients helping carry firewood. They let them wander freely. Mathieu answers calmly, "Most are not dangerous." The pilgrim shifts uneasily anyway. Fear lingers stubbornly. Yet later that same evening you watch the nervous traveller quietly accept a bowl of stew from Colin, who offers it without meeting anyone's eyes. The pilgrim thanks him softly. Something eases in the room after that. No miracle, just warmth shared across uncertainty. As night settles fully over the hospital, snow thickens beyond the windows. Candles flicker low beneath the soot-dark rafters. Patients drift slowly towards sleep wrapped in wool blankets, while attendants move quietly through the corridors checking fires and shutters. In the chapel, the old priest speaks briefly about winter saints who carried lanterns through storms to guide lost travellers home. Most holiness, he says gently, looks less like glory than persistence. The words remain with you afterward. You walk once more through the upper ward before midnight. Thomas sleeps peacefully beside his candle stub. Colin sits awake near the hearth mending a torn glove with clumsy concentration. The old man with the sleeve bells hums softly beneath his blankets, while snow whispers against the windows. The hospital feels tired tonight. but steady, held together by fires, routines, shared meals, old prayers, herb smoke, and weary hands refusing to abandon one another to the cold. Outside the walls, winter darkness stretches across forests, frozen roads, lonely farms, and distant rivers buried beneath ice. Inside, lantern light glows warmly along the stone corridors while another long medieval night settles quietly around the sleeping wards. And somewhere near the kitchens, Bruno the dog snores loud enough to suggest deep spiritual fulfillment. The deepest cold arrives just before dawn. You wake to silence so complete it almost feels fragile. No rain against the shutters, no dripping thaw water from the roofs. Even the wind has vanished. The whole hospital seems suspended beneath winter's breath. Then the bells begin. Soft. Measured. The chapel bell rolls through the dark corridors while candlelight flickers beneath doorways one by one. Somewhere below, servants stir fires back to life. Wood cracks sharply in the hearths. A patient coughs. Boots scrape softly over rushes. Morning begins again. You dress slowly in the pale cold, wrapping your cloak tightly while frost feathers the inside corners of the shutters. When you open them slightly, the world outside glows silver blue beneath fresh snow. The hospital roofs, the frozen river beyond town, the distant dark line of forest. All still. Down in the courtyard, lanterns move between the buildings like wandering stars. Today someone leaves. Not in sorrow, not in secrecy, simply leaves. Colin stands near the gate with a little bundle tied carefully beneath his arm. Sister Agnes adjusts the scarf around his neck for the third time, while pretending not to fuss over him. You'll freeze with it loose. I won't. You absolutely will. Brother Aldrich presses oat bread into the boy's hands for the road, though enough bread has been added that Colin now resembles a very anxious bakery. Mathieu checks the gate latch twice, despite clearly having checked it already. The boy's mother waits beside the mule cart below the hill. Spring has not come yet, but the Reeve believes Colin may recover better at home now that his nights have grown calmer. Whether this judgment comes from wisdom, optimism, or overcrowded wards remains uncertain. Medieval institutions rarely enjoy the luxury of simple motives. Colin himself looks both eager and frightened. Even now, it's hard to tell whether leaving the hospital feels like freedom or merely another unfamiliar road. You walk with him toward the outer gate while dawn slowly brightens the snow. Thomas stands nearby watching quietly. Will you come back? Colin asks him suddenly. Thomas thinks for a long moment. Probably for supper someday, he says. A faint smile touches Colin's face. That stew really isn't good enough for loyalty, Brother Aldrich calls from the courtyard. It grows on you, Thomas replies. Like mould. The gate opens. Cold air drifts inward, carrying the clean, sharp scent of snow and chimney smoke from the town below. For a moment no one moves. The hospital behind you glows warm with lantern light, herb smoke, and familiar voices beginning another winter morning. Then Colin steps forward. His boots crunch softly over the snow. The little bundle swings against his side. His mother sees him from the hill path below and lifts one hand immediately, relief spreading across her face even at this distance. Mathieu watches until the boy disappears into the pale morning mist beyond the town roofs. He may return, you say quietly. Perhaps. Does that trouble you? The brother pulls his cloak tighter against the cold. People return to places where someone remembered their name. The chapel bells ring again behind you. Inside the walls, daily life continues already. Fires need tending. Bread must be sliced, water hauled. Patients soothed through another cold morning. Sister Agnes is almost certainly scolding someone for ignoring socks. Nothing pauses for sentiment very long here, and yet the departure lingers softly in the air. After breakfast, snow begins falling again, not harshly, but gently, in slow drifting flakes that soften the rooftops and blur the distant roads. You spend the morning near the chapel hearth, while patients move quietly through the corridors around you. The old man with the sleeve bells dozes peacefully near the fire. A novice copies prayers at the window, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. Somewhere deeper in the ward, someone hums the familiar evening lullaby even though it is still morning. No one corrects them. The sound floats lazily through the building while candle flames bend and recover in tiny draughts. You realize then how much the hospital itself resembles a long winter vigil. Not a place of miracles, not a place of monsters, just weary people holding lamps for one another in the dark. Some recover, some do not. Some remain only days. Others stay through years of snowfalls and thawing rivers and bells marking seasons one after another. But within these walls, beneath smoke-black beams and flickering beeswax candles, suffering is at least witnessed. And perhaps that matters more than medieval chronicles ever fully understood. As evening approaches, the world outside fades gradually into white mist and falling snow. The town bells grow distant. The roads disappear beneath drifting powder. The forests beyond the river soften into shadow. Inside, warmth gathers close. Bowls of pottage steam beside the hearth. Blankets dry near the fires. Lantern light glows softly across old stone. The brothers speak in hushed, tired voices while patients settle into familiar corners beneath wool cloaks and fading candlelight. Bruno the dog sleeps beside the kitchen with complete trust in tomorrow's leftovers. Edric closes another ledger. Mathieu checks another door. Sister Agnes leaves lavender near a bedside. And slowly, almost without noticing, the hospital itself seems to exhale. The bells ring one final time through the snowy dark. Soft now. Far away, the sound drifts outward across the frozen fields, over the river reeds, beyond the forest roads where travellers still wander beneath winter stars. And here inside the quiet stone walls, beside warm embers fading gently toward ash, the long medieval night finally grows still enough for rest. Sleep settles softly through the corridors. The candles burn lower, snow gathers silently upon the roofs, and little by little, the old hospital disappears into peaceful darkness beneath the patient winter sky. The fire burns low now, more ember than flame, its soft orange glow barely touching the stone edges of the hearth. Around you, the hospital has fallen almost completely silent. Only the occasional creak of timber or whisper of wind against the shutters remains awake. The smells of smoke, lavender, wool, and melted candle wax linger warmly in the dark. Familiar now after so many long winter nights within these walls. Beyond the windows, snow continues falling over the sleeping town. It settles over market stalls, monastery roofs, frozen cart paths, and the narrow pilgrim roads winding away into forests no one wishes to cross until spring. The river moves slowly beneath its skin of ice, carrying moonlight in quiet silver fragments. Inside the wards, the patients sleep beneath patched blankets and dim lantern glow. Some dream peacefully, some stir now and then beneath the weight of old fears. But for tonight, the fires are warm, the doors are barred against the cold, and someone always remains nearby to answer a frightened voice in the dark. The brothers move softly through the corridors like tired guardians of a fragile little world. A blanket adjusted here, a candle trimmed there, a whispered prayer beside a restless sleeper. Small acts, ordinary acts, yet they hold the whole place together more surely than iron locks or stone walls ever could. And as the final embers settle inward with a gentle crackle, the bells far away at the chapel tower sound once more through the snow-soft night, low and slow and comforting. The medieval world drifts farther now. The cold roads fade. The lanterns dim. The old hospital grows quiet beneath winter skies. And at last, with the snow falling softly beyond the walls and the fire warming the last corners of the room, you rest,